Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki, Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. Resistance in Afghanistan has fallen. The Taliban claimed control of Panjshir. The Pakistani military helped them get it. And the world saw it happening, but did not say a word. Now Iran says it has launched an investigation into foreign attacks in Panjshir, quote unquote. They did not name Pakistan, but it's clear that Pakistan invaded Panjshir, and there's no better way to put it. This was an invasion. With the ISI chief in Kabul, Pakistan is controlling Afghanistan and it wants to rule by proxy. India called a high-level meeting to take stock of the evolving situation. The Prime Minister met his top cabinet colleagues. What is the rest of the world doing? They're busy legitimizing the Taliban and offering cooperation to Pakistan, and we do not expect any better from them, frankly. But we won't stop trying. Tonight on Gravitas, we ask for a global investigation on Pakistan's role in Panjshir. What was the Pakistani military doing in a foreign land? What was their role? Who sanctioned it? Will the United Nations, which sent a top official to meet the Taliban, investigate this invasion? We say hashtag. They're openly managing the affairs of the Taliban. The BBC cancels an expert who highlights Pakistan's terror links. They do it citing journalistic balance. The world calls out their bias. We'll get you an exclusive interview with the same expert, Christine Fair. Meanwhile, the Taliban's divide has triggered rumors, some of which have made it to the front pages of Indian newspapers. We want to tell you they're wrong. Mullah Baradar was not injured in an attack by the haqqanis. He was attending meetings with the United Nations. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
On his first trip since the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will be in Qatar, aiming to form a united front with allies on how to tackle the Taliban and ensure continued support for U.S. bid to help evacuate Americans and at-risk Afghans. Around 200 people, including expat Afghans and French supporters of aid groups, gathered in Paris to condemn the human rights violations. Taiwan's defense ministry has said 19 Chinese military aircraft flew into Taiwan's air defense identification zone on Sunday, including nuclear-capable bombers. Taiwan dispatched combat aircraft to warn away the Chinese planes. Guinea's military set up checkpoints on roads leading to the capital, a day after soldiers ousted President Alpha Condé. The elite unit appeared to have Condé in detention, telling the nation on state television that they had dissolved the government and the constitution. Germany's ambassador to China, John Hecker, has died barely 2 weeks after taking up the post. The cause of the death is yet to be confirmed. The jailed former president of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, has been released on medical parole, owing to what the government says is his ill health. The 79-year-old was sentenced earlier this year to 15 months in prison for contempt of court. Israeli forces are searching for 6 Palestinians after they broke out of a high-security Israeli prison. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has called it a grave incident. Workers have been trying to contain an oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico that was discovered in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida. The oil spill extends to more than a dozen miles, but is yet to reach the shore. 18th hole, sealing a one-shot win. Cantlay wins the $15 million first prize and is the first golfer in 4 years to notch up 4 or more wins in the same PGA Tour season. The blockbuster World Cup qualifier between arch-rivals Brazil and Argentina in Sao Paulo was abandoned shortly after kickoff in bizarre circumstances. Brazilian health authorities came to apprehend 4 Argentine players who have been accused of breaching COVID protocols by not adhering to a compulsory 14-day quarantine requirement for all travelers from England. Argentina refute the claims and allege they were not informed that their quartet could not play. FIFA is probing the incident.
Panjshir has fallen. It was the last holdout of resistance in Afghanistan. Now the Taliban control it. And today's story is in 2 pictures. Let me show you these 2 pictures. The first is the Taliban flag in Panjshir, and the second is the Taliban leadership meeting a United Nations representative. What do these 2 images tell you? The Pakistan military invaded Panjshir to demolish the resistance and install a Taliban flag. The world did not complain because it was busy cozying up to the Taliban. The United Nations Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs Martin Griffiths met Taliban leader Mullah Baradar and assured cooperation. Is no one standing up to the terrorists? Iran has launched a probe into the fall of Panjshir, specifically into the foreign attacks. They've not named Pakistan, but the message is amply clear. We'll discuss all of this. Let me start from the beginning. The Taliban have taken Panjshir. They hoisted their flag today in the valley. This video came out earlier today. These are men from the Taliban inside the governor's house in Panjshir claiming their victory over the National Resistance Front, or NRF. This morning, the Taliban declared their win on social media. The resistance forces contested the claim, but the images are for the world to see. Panjshir has fallen, and there is no denying that. New Delhi is closely monitoring Afghanistan. Today, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi chaired a meeting at his residence. National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, Defence Minister Rajnath Singh, Home Minister Amit Shah, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, the top cabinet colleagues of the Indian Prime Minister, were all present for this meeting. Also, National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. This shows how the situation in Afghanistan is being discussed at the highest levels of the government in New Delhi, because the fall of Panjshir is a significant event and Pakistan's role in it especially so, which is why we say hashtag probe Pak for Panjshir. There are 3 major takeaways from this development. Number 1, the Taliban are now in complete control of Afghanistan. Number 2, the resistance forces have failed to prevail, obviously. And number 3, their movement will now be reduced to a few pockets in Afghanistan instead of commanding an entire province. In other words, the resistance will continue, but on a much smaller and localized scale. Ahmad Massoud, the leader of the National Resistance Front, said as much. He released a new statement today calling on Afghans to stand up and fight the Taliban. He also blamed the international community for legitimizing the Taliban. He said the resistance force was ready to end hostilities, but the Taliban refused. So they were forced to fight, he says. Now the Taliban claim victory. Here's the next question then. Where are Ahmad Massoud and Amrullah Saleh, the 2 men who led this resistance? We don't know. But just before the fall of Panjshir, Massoud had said that he was ready to discuss a ceasefire. In a statement made yesterday, he said they will, quote-unquote, keep the conversation going. The problem is it takes 2 to talk. Are the Taliban interested now? Highly unlikely. They call the resistance forces terrorists. It's a classic case of the pot calling the kettle black.
They repeatedly gave a negative answer to our delegations and ended the negotiations. The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan was forced to send troops. Our nation no longer wants the war to continue, and there is no reason for the war to continue. Therefore, it is necessary to all our compatriots to know that the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan has ended the war.
They turned away our delegations. The Islamic Emirate was forced to send in troops. The Islamic Emirate has ended the war. This is the Taliban pretending to be statesmen. As jarring as it sounds, this is the new reality of Afghanistan. The Taliban is the state. Its leaders are the new diplomats and negotiators, and its terrorists are the armed forces of Afghanistan. But where is the government? Kabul fell almost a month ago. Why haven't the Taliban been able to install a government yet? Our correspondent Anas Malik put this question at a press conference in Panjshir. Here is what the Taliban spokesperson told him.
Anas Malik from WION. Just a question. We've seen reports that the Taliban have completed consultations on government formation and that they have invited some countries as well. Would you want to confirm these reports or deny? Thank you.
No. We are in the process of government formation. It's not complete. When it is, we will announce. We have good relations with all countries and we have sent invites to some countries for government formation ceremony as well.
So the Taliban are handing out invites for a swearing-in ceremony. Who will attend? The spokesperson did not name anyone, but WION has learned that the Taliban have reached out to at least 6 countries, the regular suspects: China, Pakistan, Qatar, Turkey, Iran and Russia. These countries, remember, actively engaged with the Taliban well before the fall of Kabul. But not all of them sound happy with the way things are playing out. Iran, for instance. Iran will investigate the fall of Panjshir. Iran issued a strong statement today. It called the fall of the province truly worrying and condemned, and I'm quoting, all foreign interference in Afghanistan. Listen to this.
The news that we are getting from Panjshir is truly worrying. We condemn last night's attacks in the strongest manner. The martyrdom of Afghan leaders is a source of deep regret. Foreign intervention must be investigated. We are investigating that.
Foreign intervention must be investigated. Foreign attacks must be investigated. We agree. And we second this call from Tehran. Tonight on Gravitas, we ask for a global investigation on Pakistan's role in Panjshir. What was the Pakistani military doing in a foreign land, we ask again? What was their role and who sanctioned it? And will the United Nations, which sent a top official to meet the Taliban, investigate this invasion? Write to us with hashtag #ProbePak for Panjshir. Meanwhile, our team was present in the valley to witness the fall. WION was in Panjshir when the Taliban launched the offensive and declared victory. Let me show you how we've covered Afghanistan like no other network over the past few weeks, traveling across the country, not limited to Kabul. When the Taliban was closing in on Kabul, we were reporting from the provinces that fell. We watched the Afghan forces retreat. When the civilian government fell, our team was in Kabul, out on the streets to capture the chaos of the bloody transition. And on the day a suicide bomber targeted the Kabul airport, we were reporting live from the scene. Today was no different. Our correspondent Anas Malik travelled to Panjshir.
Took place where I'm standing. It takes about 2.5 hours from this point to get...
He began his journey from Kabul and went all the way to Panjshir to document the fall of the province. On his way to Panjshir, Anas made 7 stops and witnessed the Taliban offensive firsthand. How they captured key areas and imposed their rule on what was the last bastion of resistance in Afghanistan. Take a look at this ground report. Let's bring you this ground report from Anas Malik. This is what he saw in Panjshir as the Taliban took control of the province.
The sign that you read behind me, it says goodbye Kabul. Beyond this it's another 100+ kilometers till the valley of Panjshir. To be precise, 102 kilometers. It takes about 2.5 hours from this point to get to the valley of Panjshir.
From Kabul border, Anas Malik travelled to the town of Charikar in Parwan province. The 1.5-hour drive shows the deserted streets with almost no people out on the roads. The entire lane is controlled by the Taliban. This closely guarded city has a significant crossroad. When one road leads to Panjshir, the other one goes to Bagram Air Base.
Where I'm standing, it's in Charikar in Parwan province, en route to Panjshir. To the right, the place that leads to is where the negotiations between the Taliban and the Panjshiri men were taking place. To my left is the way that leads to the Bagram Air Base. The Bagram Air Base that was recently handed over to the Afghan forces and is now being controlled by the Taliban. To the right is Charikar, where negotiations between Panjshiri militia and the Taliban were taking place, which now stand at a pause, and the reason that has led to the resumption in fighting.
Roughly 30 minutes from Charikar, nearly 2 hours from Kabul, lies the district of Jabal-e-Sarraj in Parwan province. It is surrounded by the high peaks of mountains and is a historic village of Afghanistan. This place is known for the anti-Soviet war resistance. It houses a famous and unique graveyard known as the Red Army Tanks Graveyard, a brown landscape strewn with decaying tanks and equipment abandoned by the Soviets back in 1989 at the end of their decade-long failed invasion. This place is famously known as the graveyard of Soviet tanks.
On the highway from Kabul to Panjshir is a place called Jabal-e-Siraj. It's roughly 2 hours from Kabul. The place is known as the graveyard of Russian tanks. Tanks like these can be found here in abundance. This is the same place that has seen and witnessed immense and intense firing just in the past few days. Both the Panjshiri side and the Taliban have suffered major losses over here. This place is now under the control of the Taliban.
After departing from Jabal-e-Sarraj, we travel towards Shotul, the village which lies at the entrance of Panjshir Valley. The route to this village lies on the banks of Panjshir and Rocky Mountains of the other side. Scores of vehicles with armed Taliban have lined up till the entry gate of the valley. Our reporter got off on the road and talked to some of the Taliban fighters to find out the ground situation.
We are standing in the first district of Panjshir known as Shotul. 24 hours back the enemy was here and we were fighting. And now the enemy has fled.
I have Mujahideen from 34 provinces and we are going to Panjshir. The provincial government is over and we are now going to overlook the operations.
And after weeks of intense battle for the last resistance holdout, Taliban now claim to have taken over the Panjshir Valley.
With the fall of Panjshir, Taliban now control the entire country, the entire 34 provinces within Afghanistan. Zabihullah Mujahid today in a press conference has assured the people of Panjshir that there's nothing to worry about and that they would be working together for the betterment of the people of the region. Anas Malik in Kabul, Afghanistan for WION, World is One.
We're now joined by our correspondent Anas Malik. He's back in Kabul. He was in Panjshir earlier today. Anas, you were in Panjshir a few weeks back before the fall of Kabul when you were traveling to various provinces in Afghanistan. And you were back in Panjshir today as the Taliban launched the offensive and declared victory. Tell us what you saw.
Well, yes, we were there on the 2nd of August, and on the 2nd of August in Panjshir, the militia was preparing to give a tough fight to the Taliban. We met school-going children, college-going children. We ran that report as well, where we met former Mujahideen leaders who were training their own children to pick up arms. The training used to take place between 6:30 a.m. and 9 a.m. in the morning, and after that, those who are being trained used to go to the college. village. And today, when we were there yesterday, we saw that there was utter chaos, scenes of commotion, because the entrance to Panjshir, which was once controlled by the Panjshiri militia, which was once controlled by people who would greet you, it was now controlled by the Taliban. And the Taliban literally controlled who went in and out of the valley, primarily because there is only one entrance to the valley, in and out. So they would be issuing special permits. They would be checking your taskeras or your IDs. If you're a Panjshiri, only then you would be allowed. If you're not a Panjshiri, then you would be needing a special permit, and that special permit too would be subjected your entry would be subjected upon the mood of the local commander. If he is in the mood to allow you in, then you go in. If he's not, then you are stuck, or he would ask you to go back all the way to Gulbahar. That's another 25 kilometers from the valley of Panjshir. We saw people moving en masse on foot because there was no transport that was available. I had access till Annaba, the second district. We were in Shutol, and then for a while we were detained as well by the Taliban because they said that we did not have special permits. In fact, it's not just us. Another foreign media team was detained today for about 1.5 hours. Day before yesterday, there were reports that a local media team that had gone to cover the Panjshir fighting, the war in Panjshir, they were detained as well. There seems to be utter disconnect between the Taliban's top leadership here in Kabul, which has been reassuring the media for freedom of press, and those who are there on ground. Those who are there on ground, they are making their own rules. They're brutal. They are trying to give this semblance of being in charge or being in control and letting people pass, but people are clearly scared and they are leaving because they have no other way out. Palki?
Right, and I've seen your reports, Anas, and we've played them out on the channel, and we know you're always in the thick of action, no matter how dangerous the situation, and we keep telling you to stay safe, but thank you for holding fort for us. One more question I want to ask you is, how have Afghans taken this news? This was the last holdout of resistance. It has fallen now. It is a top international headline. What do you notice in your conversations with them? Is there a sense of resignation, disappointment, or have they seen too much in the past couple of months to be perturbed by the fall of yet another province?
There's a complete sense of disappointment and disarray within the people of Afghanistan because they expected Panjshir to not fall, primarily because the province of Panjshir has always historically resisted oppression, be that be from the Soviets or be that be from the Mujahideens. Therefore, they expected the Panjshiri militia to put up a tough fight, but the modus operandi the Taliban opted for after suffering heavy losses is something of a classical case study, because the Panjshiri militia were using to their advantage, were using hilltops to their advantage, and were firing at the Taliban. So the Taliban they went on from Andrav Valley, went till the hilltop positions. They overran those positions at first, and then they literally came down from the slope. That is something that was to disappointment for the people of Afghanistan, because, as I said, the people of Panjshir have been looked at as those who have been very progressive, very liberal, those who have resisted oppression, come what may. In fact, the name Panjshir, it literally translates into 5 lions. In Persian, it means 5 lions, and Ahmad Shah Massoud is known as the Lion of Panjshir along the same lines. And it said that the legend said that the valley was being protected by 5 brothers who were then given the title of lions. So people had a lot of hopes with the Panjshiri militia. People had this thing in mind, that the Panjshiri militia will resist, will push back the Taliban. But to their disappointment was the lack of support from the international community, A, and B, the fact that how the Taliban went ahead, their modus operandi, and then reinforcement that came in, because we understand that there were a lot of ammunition. When I was there on the 2nd of August, we reported that as well. They were not short of ammunition, they were short of manpower. There were about 5,000 to 6,000 people who were trained, and those were clearly outnumbered, given that the Taliban they were continuously sending reinforcements. Both sides were suffering losses, but clearly the Panjshiris were outnumbered when it came to men on ground.
Right. Anas Malik, thanks very much for bringing us that update. and for telling us what's happening in Afghanistan, the most important story that the world should be paying attention to. The fall of Panjshir, of course, has Pakistan written all over it. The Pakistani military orchestrated the onslaught. The ISI chief landed in Kabul to oversee operations. They have dropped all pretense. Pakistan has used the Taliban to invade Afghanistan and rule by proxy. And the world is not just a mute spectator. It is ready to pay Pakistan to manage the Afghan crisis. It's so bizarre and incredible. It makes you wonder what kind of men and women are running the world as leaders. They're complicit in the Afghan tragedy. They remain silent on Pakistan's role. Well, here's a fact. The Taliban were in no position to enter Panjshir. They had been outflanked by the Northern Alliance. Pakistan's support changed that. And the support was as open as it gets. On Saturday, the ISI chief landed in Kabul. Lieutenant General Faiz Hamid, the chief of Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, or ISI. What was he in Kabul for? Apparently to settle disputes in the Taliban. The Rahbari Shura was divided on government formation, so the quote-unquote Rawalpindi Shura had to intervene. The Pakistani military is dictating government formation in Kabul. When the ISI chief reached Kabul, he was asked about the purpose of the visit. Here's what he said.
People in the Taliban?
No, I'm not clear. He may be able to arrange.
What do you hope will come out of this? What do you hope is going to happen now in Afghanistan? What is your best hope?
I have just landed and we are working for peace and stability in Afghanistan. Don't worry, everything will be okay.
Peace and stability in Afghanistan. That's rich coming from the chief of a rogue intel agency. A top Pakistani security official quoted by news agency Reuters told a different story altogether. He said the ISI chief was in Afghanistan to help the Taliban reorganize the Afghan military. And it doesn't take a genius to know what the aim of this reorganization was: to lay siege on Panjshir. On Sunday afternoon, the Taliban's onslaught began. All accounts from Panjshir indicate that this was an ISI-led assault, that the Pakistani Air Force used drones to drop bombs on Panjshir, with troops from Pakistan's Special Service Group assisting the Taliban on ground. All of this happened under the command of ISI chief Faiz Hamid. And this is not hearsay. This has been verified by journalists and resistance fighters in Panjshir. Let me show you one account posted by a French journalist. This was from Sunday evening. He said there's credible information to state that Pakistan's commandos are in Panjshir with Pakistan's Cobra helicopters operating in the air. What were they doing there? The next post was from an Afghan commando fighting in the Panjshir Valley. He said, and I'm quoting, "I've got a few seconds of satellite internet. We are being bombed by Pakistani drones. We are under direct invasion of ISI. Spread our word. Our civilians are under target. This could be my last tweet forever if you don't hear me from me in some days." And this was 24 hours back, and we haven't heard from him since then. Could this be a coincidence? That on Saturday, the ISI chief lands in Kabul, and the next day, the Taliban enters Panjshir. This is no coincidence. This is an open military intervention by Pakistan, an invasion. And it should weigh heavily on the conscience of world leaders, if they have any left. Thousands of Afghans are being bombarded endlessly by the Taliban and its conjoined twin Pakistan. Not just those fighting on the front lines, but the 150,000 people who call Panjshir home, they're all under threat. Their lives are about to get upended. They're about to lose their liberties and their way of life. But Western leaders could not care less. Their ministers are making a beeline for Pakistan. They're planting saplings in Islamabad and pledging millions in aid to the Pakistani government. This includes the foreign ministers of Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and the UK. All four of them visited Islamabad last week. They promised to protect the quote-unquote right to dignity of Afghans. Will they speak up for Panjshir too? Will they call out Pakistan for invading Afghanistan to rule by proxy? Will they probe Pakistan for Panjshir? They won't. For the West, Pakistan is a blind spot in their so-called war on terror. Leading this trend is the United States of America. I'll give you examples. They found Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, but they did not sanction the country. They placed a $10 million bounty on Hafiz Saeed, but they won't speak about Pakistan's patronage to this terrorist. As recent as last year, they caught 4 Pakistanis for the Paris terror attack, but they did not say a word on how the Pakistani deep state nourishes such terrorists. Now Pakistan is bombing Panjshir after installing a terrorist group on the throne of Kabul. What does it get from the West? Offers of cooperation in managing this crisis. And while Pakistan was raining fire on Panjshir, some Western journalists were busy giving cover fire. Can't say I'm surprised. The West has consistently been wrong on Pakistan. This time it was the BBC. They were hosting a discussion on the Taliban's takeover. Their guest was Christine Fair, an expert on South Asian affairs. The conversation soon turned to Pakistan. Christine Fair talked about how Islamabad cultivated the Taliban, how it continues to destabilize Afghanistan. These are perfectly factual arguments. But the BBC presenter disagreed. She took offense, even though Pakistan was criticized. Not the BBC, not the United Kingdom, Pakistan. Strange, isn't it? Not if you have followed the BBC consistently. They love pampering Pakistan. They ignore all the terror sponsoring and betrayals. Why do they do this? Because apparently that's unbiased journalism. Let me play out the discussion for you.
Pakistan likes to be thought of as the fire brigade when Pakistan is in fact the arsonist.
And Pakistan of course, would absolutely deny that. And I want to come back on your phrase. Let me come back on your phrase. An instability that it can manage. That, correct. Even if that is the case, that is an immensely risky strategy.
Even the fact that Pakistan harbors virtual petting zoos of terrorists in its own country with the hope that they will only kill their neighbors is a risky strategy.
We don't have a Pakistani diplomat or official to speak with us now. I'm going to say again that I know that they firmly deny that they have created the Taliban and that they are a prime mover behind the Taliban. And we have given you space to put your point of view, and we are going to leave it now, but thank you for being with us and for putting your point of view. You are doing their
propagandist work, and it's...
Let me say this. As a journalist, that is appalling stuff. We have been covering Afghanistan on this channel. We've had dozens of guests on our channel. Not all of them have the same opinion. Not all of them agree with our editorial positions, but we don't shut them down like this. We don't cancel them on live television. So what's the BBC's excuse? Here's what their spokesperson said, and I'm quoting, "It is standard practice for our presenters to challenge guests. The interviewee was given ample opportunity to make her point during a long interview." Was she, though? The BBC did not challenge their guest. They cancelled her. Cut her off in the name of balanced journalism. Since when does defending Pakistan count as balanced journalism? Let's go back to what Christine Fair actually said. Pakistan cultivated the Taliban, she said. They supported the Taliban through the 1990s. And just to be clear, that's a fact. It's not an opinion. And since the BBC is so obsessed with itself, let me quote from their own article. This is what they say, the BBC. Pakistan has repeatedly denied that it was the architect of the Taliban enterprise, but there is little doubt that many Afghans who initially joined the movement were educated in madrasas in Pakistan. And this article was published on the 18th of August. Nothing has changed since then. The Taliban are the same ruthless group, and Pakistan are the same shameless sponsors. So why did the BBC presenter dispute the guest? Well, that's Western media for you. Playing fast and loose with facts and shutting down experts who tell the real story. What Christine Fair said towards the end is true. The BBC is doing Pakistan's propaganda work free of cost and free of any journalistic ideas, let me add. Across social media, the opinion is the same. This is what Pakistan's former ambassador to the US wrote. How is it the BBC's job to shut down a guest? Surely they could have invited a Pakistani guest later to give their view. Sure, that was an option, but the BBC was not concerned about its own image. It was concerned about Pakistan's image. There is unilateral agreement that Pakistan supported, armed, and funded the Taliban. Any expert will tell you that. In fact, the Pakistan itself will tell you that.
और ये जितने नौजवान यहाँ मुहाजिरों में पढ़ते रहे, कई बड़ी माजरत के साथ मैं अब वजीर दाखिला हूँ, रेलवे में होता तो शायद और ज्यादा बातें कर सकता था। मेरी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी है कि ये तालिबान लीडर जो टॉप हैं वो पैदा पाकिस्तान में हुए, पढ़े पाकिस्तान में, इसमें तो पाकिस्तान की खिदमात हैं कि इनको हमने तालीम दी और अब भी कई पढ़ रहे होंगे।
That was Pakistan's interior minister. He openly admits that his country created the Taliban. But the BBC does not. It tells you everything about their editorial policy. It's less about being balanced and more about whitewashing Pakistan, because not every story has two sides. Pakistan and the Taliban definitely don't. So this militant hunt for middle ground is a farce. Typical British arrogance combined with ignorance and sinister agendas. And this is supposed to be the face of quality journalism. I think we'll take a rain check on that claim. And we spoke to Christine Fair earlier today. She is a professor of security studies at the Georgetown University, and she's an authority on South Asian affairs and counter-terrorism. I started by asking her about what happened on the BBC. Was it ignorance from the presenter or a sign of open bias?
I really wish I knew. This has really been my first experience with the BBC behaving so shamelessly. You know, she continually said, well, Pakistan would deny this. But the odd thing is that many of the things that I had stated, Pakistanis had previously stated on the BBC itself. Pakistani officials have repeatedly accepted the fact that they have creating the Taliban is a little bit of a stretch, but that it has always been a Pakistani project, that they have aided and abetted them. Musharraf himself was on BBC making these acknowledgments. What I find really very frustrating, BBC apparently issued a statement saying that it's routine that news readers challenge the guests. Well, they never challenge the Pakistani officials when they are on the BBC. They let them speak uninterrupted, no matter how preposterous the lies are. So I have to say, I find it really difficult to believe that Ms. Thomas is an ignoramus, right? These are not jobs that one just wanders into. And I've been on her show previously. I have to conclude that what she did was purposeful. And what I particularly found distasteful was the eye roll expression that she made. Now, of course, I couldn't see it during the call. I could only see it after I watched the interview the next day. It was really despicable. She really seemed to be caring more about Pakistan's feelings than she did Afghans' lives.
And it's not just the BBC. The entire Western media seems to have blinkers on. Professor Fair believes that government and commercial interests are influencing reportage, and she narrated a similar experience that she had with Bloomberg. There, the problem wasn't Pakistan, it was China.
I had a similarly obnoxious interview with Bloomberg Asia a few weeks ago. So if Ms. Philippa Thomas's red line was speaking the truth about Pakistan, the issue there was China. That interview was centered around how will the Taliban govern? And I made the point, it's whether or not Western countries acknowledge the Taliban is irrelevant. It has what it needs from the 4 embassies that are open in Kabul, and that is, of course, China, Russia, Pakistan, and Iran. And I pointed out that the Chinese have had a long-standing working relationship with the Taliban pre-9/11. I talked about the different investment projects that the Chinese did for the Taliban before 9/11, and the commitments to do the same now. And the host tried to shut me down. He says, well, of course, that's your opinion. I said, no, these are facts. I can send you the documentation that I have used to inform my opinion. And he continued to call it an opinion. And I said, sir, it's a fact. I'm not going to have you tell me that this is an opinion. These are facts. The Taliban had a deal with the Chinese pre-9/11. The Taliban have been negotiating with the Chinese. That you don't know this is astonishing to me, but this is a fact.
We also asked her about Western governments. They seem to follow the same pattern. Multiple lives for Pakistan, despite their betrayals and double games. Professor Fair says there are Pakistan sympathizers within the Western establishment. They could be writers, think tanks, or activists.
That is a question that I have to say really frustrates me. And for the last couple of years, I actually just stopped writing op-eds because it was just so tiresome and no one seemed to care. You know, I think there are a couple of reasons. I can't speak to the British. Honestly, the British are far worse than the Americans. The British will defend the worst of the Pakistanis. I don't know if you saw what the British Army chief had said a few weeks ago about Pakistan being the biggest victim here. And I wanted to scream, like, how can you say Pakistan's the biggest victim? The Afghans are the biggest victim. And Pakistan isn't a victim at all. You know, it's sort of like calling the rapist a victim. I mean, it is just, it is outrageous. So I don't have a lot of good answers. But what I will say, having watched the Pakistanis in play for quite some time, they have very well-placed interlocutors at major think tanks. And I have said this repeatedly, time and time again. So you have the Stimson organization. Now, what does it mean to have an interlocutor? I am not accusing the Pakistanis of paying them. I'm certainly not making, because you don't actually have to pay them. When Michael Crapon refuses to condemn anything that Pakistan does, or Samir Lawani, they're not doing it because the Pakistanis are paying them. That's ridiculous. They're doing it because they have grants for projects. And to get those grants, they had to promise access to Pakistan. And you're not going to get access to Pakistan if you don't defend their outrages. But when it comes to the level of the government, obviously, you would argue that they would know better. And the problem there is that the Pakistan problem is really hard, right? And they don't want to admit publicly that we have to acquiesce to Pakistan because it has nuclear weapons and a lot of terrorists. But in practice, they do. I mean, you saw this in a Lindsey Graham tweet a couple of weeks ago, where he basically said as much. You know, Pakistan's got a bunch of nuclear weapons and a lot of terrorists, so we're going to have to basically work with Pakistan. So essentially, Pakistan, it really does. You know, it's not just a joke; it's a truth. Like, Pakistan really is the arsonist, right? Then it goes out and does a GoFundMe campaign to buy up a bunch of PR reps to peddle Pakistan's reputation so that everyone thinks it is, in fact, the fire brigade. That's their business model. And it works. It really works.
We also discussed the world's options. What can the world do? Clearly, there's a new nexus between China, Pakistan, and the Taliban. So how will this nexus survive? Are there chances of an internal collapse?
The only way that this axis of weasels get broken is if China and Russia begin experiencing blowback. But I don't know on what scale that blowback would require, given the interests that China has economically in Afghanistan. And you know, of course, Pakistan has suffered blowback. It's already beginning to suffer blowback. And as long as the people that are dying are not Punjabis, the Pakistanis don't care. As long as it's Baloch and Pashtuns that die, the Pakistanis are really not terribly moved. And as long as those attacks happen in places that are not strategic. So I'm actually very pessimistic about what can happen. The Taliban have a very large collection of U.S. weapon systems. They have trainers, right? How did the Taliban learn to fly Blackhawks? They're pretty difficult to operate aircraft. Well, clearly the Pakistanis helped them do that. So I'm really not optimistic. I think the options that India had in the 1990s, those options are gone, right? It looks as if Panjshir has just been decimated with the help of these Pakistani airstrikes.
Indeed. which is why we're calling for pro-Pak for Panjshir. That's the hashtag we want you to respond on. Meanwhile, the Taliban are busy courting allies and cobbling partnerships. But they still don't have a government. It's been 22 days since the Taliban took Kabul. They waited 20 years for this moment to return to Kabul and to rule Afghanistan. Just one problem: they have no idea how to. Forming a government is never easy. We know how difficult it is in democracies. Now add guns and ethnic rivalries to this equation, and it explains all the delay. You see, the Taliban are a broad group. They have many ethnicities, they have many factions. Not all of them are on the same page. Now, normally such differences would be resolved through talks. But don't forget, this is the Taliban. Talks are not their strong suit. This weekend, we got a glimpse of their approach. Multiple reports claim that Mullah Baradar was injured. Apparently, there was a clash on Friday night. Baradar's men versus the Haqqani network. It left the Taliban co-founder injured, said some reports. Turns out all those reports were false. Mullah Baradar was not injured. In fact, he is busy meeting delegates from the United Nations. They promised him humanitarian support for Afghanistan. So those reports were wrong, probably propaganda. But let me tell you this. There is no smoke without fire. The Taliban may try to project unity, but behind the scenes, there is bickering and infighting. Who gets the big ministries? Who controls the military? This is the true face of the Taliban. They're not liberators or crusaders. They're power-hungry barbarians. There are two main factions in this power struggle. Faction number one is the Doha group, which includes Mullah Baradar and Sher Mohammad Stanekzai. Both men are guaranteed top government positions. Faction number two is the Haqqani network. There is no clarity on what their role will be. Remember, this is a United Nations designated terror group, the Haqqanis. Putting them in the government is a big risk. But the Haqqanis bring the muscle. They are supported by Pakistan and they have ruthless fighters in their ranks. Bottom line, the Haqqanis are not conceding. So what do they want? They have a problem with Haibatullah Akhundzada as supreme leader. There is some speculation that Akhundzada is dead and the Doha faction is using his name to command the Taliban. Wouldn't be a first for them. The news of Mullah Omar's death was suppressed for nearly 2 years. That's conflict number one. Conflict number two is the inclusion of civilian leaders. Should the likes of Hamid Karzai and Abdullah be part of this new government? The Doha faction says yes. Not to share power, but to fool the global community. The Haqqani network disagrees. They don't want members of the toppled regime. These are the two main differences between the Doha faction and the Haqqanis. But the problems don't end here. There is another Taliban faction vying for power, equally strong and equally stubborn. The group led by Mullah Yaqub, he heads the Taliban's military. Yaqub has a problem with the Doha leadership. He says they lived in posh hotels, they held talks in AC conference rooms, while back in Afghanistan the commanders did all the fighting. So Mullah Yaqub wants military leaders in government, not the Doha leadership. There is also disagreement on the rule of law, or rather rule of Sharia. We've heard the Taliban spokesman make tall promises on women's equality, on freedom of speech, on general amnesty. This is supposed to be the moderate face of the Taliban. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but unfortunately it's true. There are factions in the Taliban that want extreme interpretation of the Sharia. Most of them are based in Kandahar. Once they reach Kabul, this bickering could escalate. Who pays for this delay? Not the Taliban, certainly. They're happily lounging in the presidential palace. This delay will hurt the Afghan people. Right now, foreign aid has stopped. There is no one controlling the banks, no one planning economy or tackling the refugee crisis. We don't expect the Taliban to expertly solve these problems, but every country needs a government, however bad, especially a war-torn country like Afghanistan. This infighting is a sign of things to come. Even if the Taliban do cobble up a government, can they remain united? What is stopping these factions from waging turf wars? Nothing. And that's what happens when warlords and extremists capture power. They're anarchists by design. Order and peace are alien to them. We're out of time. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.